Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And listeners like you who support us on Patreon or Substack, sign up for exclusive benefits at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock or ihearofsherlock.substack.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 288, Clutches of a Fiend.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now, here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder.
Oh, welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Johnny Olson.
Oh, you fiend. You cad. You...
No one but you will know who Johnny Olson was, but you and I can appreciate
I remember
that.
Johnny Olson. He was right up there with Roddy.
Yes, come on down.
The old game show hosts from the 70s, yeah. Well, we'll see if we can maybe get AI to put them in our employ during the Canonical Couplet quiz later in the show.
I am working on a big story AI alternative that I call Oy Vey. And it's just as good as AI, but we don't bother at all about facts or accuracy and really just say anything that comes into our mind. I think it's a lot of fun.
You know, I think I am really going to identify with that new service. Oy vey.
Oy vey. I'm getting a lot of investors, $6 billion market cap. I'm going to call NVIDIA, get not a lot of technology, just maybe a Kia trunkload of chips from NVIDIA.
That works. But
couple of kids, couple of coders. We'll be in business shortly.
Is Oy vey trained on your canonical couplet answers?
Are you kidding?
I feel like it is.
I rely on it for my canonical
Oh, that's what you've been using this whole time. Well,
yeah.
You might want to hold off those investors for a little bit.
It's like my favorite joke. You know, guess what? I'm the king of non sequiturs. Now you're supposed to say really.
Really?
Yes, hobnail boots.
Well, see, now you're doing a Trifles crossover. So this is great. This is great. Incidentally, I was interacting with a fan of the show on Reddit recently, and I had inserted a link to some of our Clive Marison and Bert Cool's episodes about the radio that we did, episodes 68, 69, and 202, I believe they are. And over the course of this dialogue on Reddit, I mentioned a couple of Trifles episodes. And this person who has been a fan of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere for a long time wasn't aware of Trifles. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity for us to begin to do a little more cross-promoting between the two shows. I know we mention I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere over on Trifles, but I don't know that we necessarily do as good a job of promoting Trifles here on iHose.
Well, you've done such a good job right now. I think I'm going to stop and go listen to an episode.
Oh, perfect. I'll see you later.
Goodbye.
Well, this episode is going to be a wonderful conversation with Steve Doyle. You may recognize Steve from as one half of Wessex Press, but he is also the editor of The Clutches of a Fiend, which is the latest BSI Manuscript Series book. It's the manuscript of the Illustrious Client. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit of Sherlockian news. We're going to do the Canonical Couplet quiz after the interview, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Everyone is eligible to play, and there will be a prize associated with this, something from the iHo's vaults. But also, we should remind you that you can sign up for updates from us wherever you get podcasts. The show notes are available in your podcast app, but those will also lead you to places like, ihearofsherlock.com, our website, where you can sign up for email updates, to our Substack. That's ihearofsherlock.substack.com. And, of course, Patreon, patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. And in all of those places, you have an opportunity to select when and if and how you'd like to support the show. For as little as $1 a month, it helps us to produce what we've got here, to schedule interviews and host the show and all the rest. So your help in keeping I Hear of Sherlock everywhere alive is greatly appreciated, whatever you can do. Have you visited mxpublishing.com lately? Well, if not, I can tell you you're missing something. You're missing a lot. If we look at some of their new publications, just going back to the 22nd of May, which, by the way, if you are paying attention, you will realize that that was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's birthday. Great day to celebrate. It's also a great day for the MX book of new Sherlock Holmes stories, volumes 43 through 45, to be released, edited by David Markham. Also released that day, the monographs Becoming Sherlock Holmes, 2nd edition by Ben Cardall. On the 29th, there was The Woodland Grave by Tony Reynolds, and The 613 from Fairfield Junction and Other Sherlock Holmes stories by Dennis Smith. Moving into June, we have Holmes & Company books 7 through 9 by Alison Osborne, Sherlock Holmes and the Abominable Worm of Fleet Street by Miguel Rivera, and One Deadly Souk, codename Delta, Book 3 by Oscar Ortiz. There's so much to explore at mxpublishing.com. Head on over there and tell them I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere sent you. Okay, this is the part of the show where we give you all the Sherlockian news that fits into our headphones. Bert, what stories do we have to share this week or this fortnight with regard to Sherlockian news?
Well, there are always a lot of things going on in the Sherlockian world, but I think by far the most interesting thing to our listeners is, actually, I suppose it's just tangentially related to Sherlock Holmes, but really this is great. There is an exhibition that I just discovered. I didn't know anything about it, called Murder by the Book. It's in England at Cambridge, and I believe it opened in April, and it runs until August. It's a celebration of 20th century British crime fiction. And the website that they have for this is just first rate. In the exhibition, they've got nearly 100 of the most famous crime novels in UK history, first editions from the library's unique collection, original dust jackets. And they've got wonderful things like Agatha Christie's typewriter, which turns out to be a 1937 Remington. Now, I'm sure she had lots of typewriters, or more than one, but it's really a star exhibit. And for those of us who are interested in old typewriters, and I have a small collection of old typewriters, and friends, if you are a Sherlockian who collect typewriters, I'd like to hear from you, because there's probably a little subset of us. I know a couple of my friends. Scott happens to have an old Corona from, I think, the 1930s, and my friend
Royal.
Bruce Harris.
It's a Royal Model O.
Oh, you have a Royal?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought it was a Corona, a Royal Model O.
No, the Corona I keep in the fridge.
What year is the Corona?
1937.
Oh, isn't that interesting? A Model O. I'll have to check that out. I have a Royal...
This typewriter was alive and typing the same time that Agatha Christie's 1937 Remington was up and working.
Right. Well,
maybe they wrote letters to each other.
Maybe they did. My friend Michael Barton has a 1937 Royal Deluxe, and I am actually just finishing restoring a 1937 Royal Deluxe, too, interestingly enough. My friend Bruce Harris has an old Smith Corona. And I just love old typewriters from the 50s and 40s. And 30s. But anyway, at this exhibition, you've got Agatha Christie's 1937 Remington, and apparently her dictaphone, which is, it looks to be in a yellow leather case that she would carry around, and the typescript of her last Poirot novel. So, but the website is really a lot of fun to look at. And beautifully done by Cambridge. So we'll have that in the show notes.
Wonderful design. And in that same kind of typescript you might recognize from some of these great novels. Well, also something our fans might be interested in, the third entry in the Knives Out franchise. It's going to be called Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. And Andrew Scott is going to be joining the cast. Now, those of you who are perhaps squeeing right now, you know who Andrew Scott is. Those of you who are scratching your head right now or turning to IMDb, let me save you the trouble. Andrew Scott played Moriarty in the BBC Sherlock, a very dastardly, quiet, and menacing Moriarty. But he will be joining, he'll be putting his acting skills to use and joining the Knives Out 3 film. So it should be a lot of fun to see Daniel Craig return to that and have Andrew Scott there with him.
Yes, too. Andrew Scott is a terrific actor. He was also in Fleabag, and I think he did Hamlet too on stage. But he's a terrific actor.
Yeah.
And then in the heartstrings department, friends, I think you've probably missed the opportunity here. But for those of you in Sarasota, Florida, at least as recently as four days ago or so, Sherlock Holmes, the pup, was available as a rescue. He was 4 years old, a mixed breed, and the opportunity to find a forever home for this 50-pound mixed breed, 4 years old, who looks very attractive in the photograph I'm looking at, was at the, I think, Manatee County Animal Welfare. And it turned up on the ABC news outlet on ABC 7 in Sarasota, Florida. So Sherlock Holmes has now made it to the attractive features of a rescue pup. And I can't think of anything more appropriate than that.
The curs of the Baskervilles. No.
What a great name for a scion about dog lovers.
There you go. Oh, I like that.
That's clever.
Well, returning to the theater for just a moment, Sherlock Holmes in the Precarious Position is currently playing at the Taproot Theater. Do we know where the Taproot Theater is, Bert?
It's in Seattle, Washington.
In Seattle, oh, of course, perfect. Seattle, yeah. It's non-canonical. It's obviously based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but Margaret Rather wrote it, and evidently Holmes and Watson are brought a case by Mrs. Hudson. Her friends Minnie and Winnie, yes, that's right, Minnie and Winnie, have been duped by a sketchy employment scheme, and they want Holmes to find out who is at the heart of it. But this little diversion may have more behind it. And that's interesting because you recall the Red-Headed League. That was based on a dubious employment scheme as well. So great ideas just kind of being recycled and recast here in new and different ways.
Yes. I loved the review of this, which said, "It's not brilliant or life-changing, but I will go so far as saying it's gigalicious."
Gigalicious. I think people say that about our show every now and again. Gigalicious.
I say that about my sock drawer, so why not about this show? and then last, we've mentioned this before, but for those of you who are not paying attention, which is probably most of you, there will be a Sherlock Holmes Christmas comedy.
Oh, superb.
So if you are looking woefully at your calendar and wondering what on earth do you have to look forward to, Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber are working on a comedy musical about Sherlock Holmes. The former members of the Penny Dreadful sketch group are writing this book. Holmes is against a serial killer who's dispatching his victims with methods suggested by the Christmas Carol. And it will be their first songs, Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber, their first songs together in 28 years.
Wow.
So it is something to get your plane tickets, folks, and be prepared to be in the UK for the premiere.
Okay, let's close up that news bag. Stephen Doyle, BSI, was invested in the Baker Street Irregulars as the Western Morning News, and he's one half of the Sherlockian publishing company Wessex Press and Gassagene Books. He's written or edited 6 previous books on Sherlock Holmes, including Murderland, G.K. Chesterton's Sherlock Holmes, the Illustrious Client's 4th casebook, and Sherlock Holmes for Dummies. He is also the publisher of the Baker Street Journal and the host of the video podcast, The Fortnightly Dispatch. Steve Doyle, welcome back to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Well, it's nice to be here again, guys. I've been here before.
You want to take any? You want to take any?
I've been here before, he said uncertainly.
Yeah, well, Bert, you have too. That's amazing. You guys have that in common.
We
Well,
do.
you know what I mean? I've been here like 4 times or something.
That's exactly right. I was going to ask you if you knew how many times. That's exactly right. You joined us, Steve, for the very first time on episode 25 as editor of Sherlock Holmes for Dummies. And then you came back 8 episodes later with David Stewart Davies to talk about the life of Edward Hardwicke shortly after he passed. And then you were back with episode 145 talking about Gillette to Brett, that wonderful conference that you put on. And the latest one was, oh my goodness, 101 episodes ago on 187 talking about the Sherlock Holmes Review, which is
right. Yes.
now has been resurrected.
Alive and kicking.
Yeah. So welcome back. We're here to talk this time about your project, because you were the editor of the latest BSI Manuscript entry, Clutches of a Fiend, a facsimile of the original manuscript of the Illustrious Client. I'm interested in how you got tapped for this particular manuscript, for this book.
Well, it goes back a few years. It's no surprise that the book people in the BSI work ahead. So Mike Whalen, when he was still with us, came to me one day and said, we got permission to reproduce the manuscript for the Illustrious Client. And since you are the current Illustrious Client of the Illustrious Clients of Indianapolis, how would you feel about taking the book on? And I was delighted. I thought, sure, I'll do it. That's great. I'm very pleased. And it was far enough out that I didn't have to think about it for a while. and then it started getting closer. And so I was able to assemble a good team and carry it off. But that's how it started. Basically, I have a local connection, obviously, to the Illustrious Clients, and I do have an affection for that story. So that's really how that came about.
So tell us a little bit about the Illustrious Clients, what that means in terms of Sherlockian parlance. There may be listeners who are tuning in who may not attend Sherlock Holmes Society meetings. They may not understand what the Illustrious Client of the Illustrious Clients means. So translate that for us.
Sure. Well, the Illustrious Client is the leader of the local Indianapolis, Indiana BSI Scion Society, known as the Illustrious Clients of Indianapolis. And the clients were formed, and we're one of the oldest in the country. We were formed in 1946. Our founder, technically we have founder and co-founder, but really technically the founder of the club was a 14-year-old boy named Jerry Williamson, extremely precocious, who fell under the spell of Sherlock Holmes after he saw a Basil Rathbone movie in downtown Indianapolis. And ambitious, precocious, a little naive, a little obnoxious. I mean, we all were at 14, I think. And there he was, and he began corresponding with the likes of Vincent Sterrett, Edgar Smith, Christopher Morley, and a host of other front-rank irregulars in the golden age of the early to mid-1940s. And before there were, Scion societies were just beginning. And Jerry, if you ever get a chance to read any of his early correspondence, it was no surprise that most of the people he was writing to and corresponding with really did not know he was a teenager. And so he was able to get away with a lot of stuff, and I think any kind of bias or dismissiveness they might have had wasn't there, because it was all old-fashioned typewriter correspondence, and they just thought he was an adult. And he was urged to start a science society here by Clifton R. Andrews of the Akron group over in Ohio, and the rest he did, and the rest is history. And so here we are after all this time, founded by our 14-year-old founder, and I'm the current illustrious client. It's an honor. I take very seriously to shepherd this club here in Indianapolis.
One of the things that's unique about the Illustrious Client, not unique, but a real differentiator, and it's shared with a couple of other, but a small handful really of other scions, I think, to the extent that it's done, is the publishing that the Illustrious Clients have done over the years. And I think are there 5 case books or 4 case books that have been published over the years?
5 or 6. I lose track myself, to be honest with you. And it goes back, I think there's 6, and there's 2 series. There's the case books and there's the case notes. The case books began right out of the gate. It was published in 1947, and it had, publishing, we take it for granted nowadays. With the democratization of print technology, it's not, almost anybody can get a book into print. This is notwithstanding what the quality is or anything, but anybody can get a book into print. But in those days, to do it, you had to really want to do it. It was a labor of love to do it. Expensive and time consuming, and technology was rudimentary, and yet the Illustrious Clients published the Illustrious Clients case book. That's what it was called, and it was it had contributors, included Vincent Sterritt, Christopher Morley, Edgar Smith, and along the way, a series of them came out in the early first wave of the club, and they had Anthony Boucher, and you name it. Just the top rank of Sherlockian authors from that era were in them, and quite a feat. They were resurrected. The series was resurrected in 1994. Illustrious Client's fourth case book, and it was we've been putting them out regularly ever since. And then in the mid 80s, there was a second line. The case books always have a mix of local, Illustrious Clients members, as well as work solicited from Sherlockians around the country and around the world, sort of in the spirit of the original, the first case book. Case notes are all internally generated work. They're both really good. We're really proud of them. And we just had, I think we've had 3 of those, of the case notes. So, but there's a lot of publishing. Plus, we have a newsletter that comes out 9 times a year in print. And so, yes, it has always been a publishing science society.
Yeah, it's a wonderful heritage that the society has left to its members as well as Sherlockians at large, because these publications, well, certainly the older ones are available if you seek them out in rare bookshops and booksellers, etc. But of course, the newer publications are available thanks to your publishing house, Wessex Press, which our listeners should know that name like the backs of their hands, because you've been
we actually, obviously we contribute the production of the volumes, but the clients are the publishers.
Okay.
We market them through Wessex Press.
Okay.
So that's kind of how that works.
Right. But they're of course available through your website.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's get into the Illustrious Client manuscript here. I'm interested in the provenance of the manuscript, because this isn't one of those manuscripts that's been passed around from collector to collector. This has a fairly straightforward provenance. Tell us about where we got it from in terms of the scan, and how it got to where it currently resides.
Sure. The as you were just saying, Scott, the manuscripts are canonical Sherlockian manuscripts are all over the place, right? Some of them are in private hands, and some of them are in public institutions. And really, kind of no matter where they are, it's kind of hard to get a hold of them and get them scanned. It's a difficult thing, even when you can get permission to get them scanned, reproduced. Many of them are bound. Most of them are bound, and that's a very difficult task. And they're delicate, sometimes. And so anyway, this one does not come from a private collector. It comes from the National Library of Scotland, and they generously gave us permission to reproduce the manuscript of the Illustrious Client. Now, you can read all about that in the book itself. It's it's a standard manuscript series book. In that regard, it's got the manuscript, and it's got a transcription, and it's got a bit of the provenance of it, and but it's as you said, it's pretty straightforward in its history.
And who gave it to the National Library of Scotland?
Well, I'm trying to remember now. It's been a while since I've worked on this book, so I'm trying to recall it.
Well, let's put it this way: it came from a namesake of the author.
Oh, did it come from Adrian or Dennis?
It came from Dame Jean.
Oh, Dame Jean. All right. Well, it's right. It comes back to me.
You're close. Yeah. This is Arthur Conan Doyle's youngest child, Dame Jean Conan Doyle. when she died. She had a number of manuscripts in her possession, and I guess she gave the National Library of Scotland their choice. And as Randall Stock tells us in this chapter, the Illustrious Client was Conan Doyle's selection for his 6th most favorite Sherlock Holmes story.
Well, I can't disagree with that. That's one of my favorites as well.
And it's a really good story, but here's the thing, and I think you noted this in your introduction, Steve. It's not a traditional Sherlock Holmes story by any stretch of the imagination. This is a modern tale for modern sensibilities.
Indeed, it is. It's in the case book, which was published, the last collection. Most of these stories were published in the 1920s and late teens, early 20s, early to mid 20s. And we are in a different era than the rest of the canon here. I mean, these are all post-World War I tales, and the world was a completely different place at that time by then. And the case book is replete with evidence of the change in the world. As I've said elsewhere, if a Victorian reader, say a classic 1895 reader of the Strand magazine, managed to find himself suddenly in the era of the case notes, reading the case notes, he would be wondering what happened to my Sherlock Holmes stories. The whole case book is replete with brutal violence, sexual perversion, sexual abuse, madness, revenge, suicide, disfigurement. Not one, but 2 disfigurements. I mean, facial disfigurements. It's a collection of stories that is unlike anything that preceded it. And I think within the case book, the Illustrious Client is probably the most, I believe it's the most modern tale, and I believe it's got the most modern villain in the canon, and that's Baron Gruner, the Korean murderer.
Well, it's a characteristic of Conan Doyle that, unlike other writers, he moved with the times and generally reflected popular culture, or not popular culture really, but popular reader. He knew what would excite and interest and what readers wanted. And so the Illustrious Client and the casebook stories aren't outliers, really. They're just sort of reflect, unlike P.G. Wodehouse, who basically wrote, the same sort of story ever since, the early 19-teens.
Right.
It's
not
he got
that was unchanging well into the 70s. It's like, you're right, Bert. Conan Doyle was never writing. He never set out to write historic, cozy detective fiction. He was always, in his own mind, writing contemporary crime fiction, detective stories. They're always modern and modern and up to date. And I believe that he was these Sherlock Holmes stories are an absolute reflection of not only the times he lived in, but his own taste, his own taste as well.
I think that's very astute because, and in fact, the Illustrious Client has got Conan Doyle's fingerprints all over it, as readers will see if they consult Clutches of a Fiend, which is the name of this manuscript book. And Randall's done a lovely job with his essay illuminating the Illustrious Client, its history and manuscript, because he points out, two interesting things. One is the quote from Conan Doyle in which, to your point, he had this sort of odd, objective sense of it. He said, it's not remarkable for plot, but it has a certain dramatic quality and moves adequately in lofty circles, which, is a loveliest. I mean, he might have been writing a book review about his own story. And then the really interesting thing is that Randall points out that Conan Doyle's knighthood was rumored in April 1902, and in the Three Garadebs, Holmes refuses a knighthood in June 1902. Mm-hmm. But here, the manuscript is the only manuscript that Conan Doyle actually signed at the end, Sir A. Conan Doyle, rather than, just A. Conan Doyle. So the conclusion that Randall comes to is that, well, clearly, honors lists and knighthoods were clearly on his mind.
Well, I think he's absolutely right about that. I think that his affection for the story, well, he did put it in his top 10. I think it was number 6, as Scott mentioned earlier. The story, I will disagree with him one thing, about one or two things in that comment. I think the story is more than, the plot is more than adequate, or however he characterized it. I think the plot is absolutely unique. We have, there's no crime here, but it's sort of I don't even know how to, it's, they're trying to save somebody, this sort of deluded, hypnotized young woman from, essentially a fate worse than death, and probably death as well. Right. And so that's pretty unique. I mean, there's no, probably the closest parallel you can get to would be something like Copper Beaches, where Violet Hunter comes and wants to know, and Holmes is concerned for her, wants to know, should I take this job? And, of course, he's lamenting that, my practice has touched bottom. I'm now advising young women on, boarding schools and that sort of thing. But really, his intervention there, until he was actually on the scene or figured it out, was really not criminal, but there was something strange was going on here. And that's what drew him in. But even that's kind of a weak parallel. This story, I think, is extremely unique, and it has so much going in it. We've got an illustrious client. We all pretty much know who that is, Edward VII. We have we're moving in very exalted social circles here. We have somebody who is really a serial sexual predator. This is an unheard of thing in the canon. I mean, it is right out there. It's not even really hit, I mean, it's written in the voice of the times, but everybody knows what we're saying here when you read it. We know what this is. This guy is not a good person. And he, let me put it this way. I have spoken elsewhere about Baron Gruner. I think he is the worst, hands down, the worst villain in the canon. With Moriarty, it was business. As Holmes himself says, you have a man to be removed, a paper to be extracted, a job to be done. You can contact the professor, and it's a contract, and he takes care of it. Here, it's a completely different thing. This guy is preying on women.
I think the difference here that you're getting at, Steve, is that Professor Moriarty, he dealt in the business of crime, and dealt with crime as almost like a mathematical problem, whereas Baron Gruner ruined lives. I mean, he took lives too, but he also ruined women.
Ruined them.
And did so ruthlessly. And I think what adds to this, the drama that Conan Doyle brought to this plot, was Holmes recognizing that he's a cold-blooded killer, and we all get to see that he's a serial sexual predator. We get the hot-headed Kitty Winter, who is trying her darndest to warn Violet de Merville. And then, to make it even worse and more vexing, you have that icy coolness of Violet de Merville, who will not be moved in her opinion of him. And that makes it just all the more frustrating for the reader, for Holmes, for Kitty Winter, for everyone involved as we're watching this play out and we know where it might be headed.
Oh, exactly. And it is absolutely frustrating. I mean, what will it take to make her see the light? But see, that's the manipulation and the psychological hold that he has on her, that he's told her every horrible deed of his past, and yet done it in a way to make himself out to look like a victim or a martyr, or he's spun it in a way that she has sympathy for him rather than contempt or disgust or fear. And I think the most chilling thing of all is the diary, right? I mean, the diary, the lust diary, it's got photographs and records, notes of details. What are these details? Souls I have ruined. That's what it should be called, Mm-hmm. And of all the women, there's enough women in there that it needs a diary to put them in. I mean, that is astounding. There's nothing like that in any other story in the entire canon.
Yeah.
And this guy, he's truly a monster. And what really gets me is when he meets Holmes, Holmes goes to meet him, he's got the upper hand on Holmes. Holmes has no, this guy is such a practiced hand at what he does that even the appearance of Sherlock Holmes does nothing, it means nothing to him.
Yeah, it's just made for dramatization. And you have a chapter in here by Les Klinger called The Lust Diary of Adalbert Gruner. And for folks following along at home who do not have the book, it comes with a lovely centerfold. You might... No, I'm kidding.
In a brown paper wrapper.
That's in the appendix. You have to buy that separately.
Les actually has the Lust Diary. Yeah.
I wouldn't doubt it. Let's not forget, Les is the one who interviewed Hugh Hefner for the Baker Street Journal years ago. So there's that connection. And also, in the lead up to this, as we were talking about kind of the psychological aspect of it, a wonderful chapter on the re-education of Violet de Merville by Monica Schmidt, who is, of course, a trained therapist. So a couple of really interesting chapters there that get into more details into what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's there's a little bit of something for everybody.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So let's talk about the visual aspect of it. The cover. I mean, the covers are always interesting because they're taken from original illustrations here. But I was particularly struck by this one because of the colors. And it's one of my favorite illustrations of the canon. This stark image of Holmes in the doorway with the bloody bandaged head staring down Baron Gruner just before the latter gets hit in the face with some vitriol. Talk to us about the visual elements of the story and of the cover that you chose here.
Right. Well, our first thought was of course, you always want to go to, the artwork of, if you can, from, this is what we like to do anyway, because Mark Gagan and I did this cover together, and we sort of were hoping to find an illustration that would really kind of say it all, right? And there was one in there, and it's this dramatic moment where Holmes appears. He's been, you can see that he's got the bandage around his head. He survived the attack of a severe beating that put him, he was beaten so badly it made the papers, right? I mean, that's how bad Holmes was was beaten up. And so there's this moment where Watson has been trying to hold Gruner's attention, and the whole thing's falling apart, and then Holmes makes his dramatic appearance there in the doorway. And that was the moment that was illustrated that we chose to reproduce. But, we could have just colorized it, but we really didn't want to just reproduce it. We wanted to sort of interpret it. And so that's what we did with it. We did spend some time on it, and I think it really came out really well. I think it really grabs the spirit of the whole book, and it's very dramatic, if I do say so myself. So we did an interpretation on it, colored it, but we also textured it and did some other things to it, and yeah, it's really nice. And I'm glad that you like it, Scott. It's really one of our favorites, or one of our recent favorites.
Yeah, it's very well done. Better even than the original.
I think so.
And who was the original illustrator for this story?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I cannot remember.
Bert?
Well, Howard Elcock did the interior illustrations. So I imagine this is one of Elcock's. And you've improved on, Elcock. I've just written about Elcock. And to make a long story incredibly brief, when he first started drawing Sherlock Holmes, I think in 1923 for The Creeping Man, he paid a lot of attention and did a lovely job. But by the time 1925 and 1926 rolled around, he was very, very, very busy. And I don't think that his 1925 and 1926 illustrations are among his best work. But this is really, you've made it really very striking, and I think the rendering of Holmes is better than Elcock's own rendering of Holmes.
Well, thank you. Adding a little color, a little blood to the bandage, and all that really helps too. And I think, but it's not just that it was color. We did work on it. We did sort of interpret it as a painting rather than an illustration.
Yeah, that improves it, because one of the unfortunate things Howard Elcock did when he was sort of running out of time was to put a lot of strokes in, just sort of to color up space. And, you can see that in some of his other work. You've treating it like a painting, you've really added a great quality to it, and made the whole thing more coherent, I think.
Thank you. There's always a moment when we're working on covers, sometimes when we're, for the BSI Manuscript Series, we have had we've been blessed to have access to, occasionally, to original, let me back up a minute. Our favorite is when we get something that has a beautiful Frederick Dorr Steele cover illustration that we can repurpose and use for the cover of the book. Steele was a tremendous graphic artist. He is, if you've done any kind of graphic design or graphic work, particularly for publication, you immediately begin to appreciate the quality of his work. His black and white interior stuff is very atmospheric, but he really shines when he's doing color covers for like Collier's. Those things are tremendous, and pencil, pen, crayon, uses all these mediums to execute the illustration. And so then when you have the ability to take those, even though they were done 100 years ago or something, the quality of the work is still there. And when you bring them into modern design tools and graphic design tools, they really pop. You can just really see what the quality is, and it really allows us to do something special. So that's our favorite thing to do is to get now, and we've had the opportunity occasionally to get original steel illustration, which is really a rare thing and super nice. But even the reproductions, like on the Collier's covers and that sort of thing, are so good that we can work with those as well. A book like this, or a book like Trenches, if you remember that book, that had a steel illustration. That was an interior illustration that we did a similar kind of treatment on. Take an interior black and white illustration and reinterpret it for a color cover. That is that's a little more challenging, but that's kind of fun in the challenge. And there's always a moment when we're doing something like this where it's like Mark goes, "Hey, I have an idea," and oh, that's good. Okay, hey, now do this. Try this. And there's always a moment where suddenly the thing just like appears, you know? We always get this little collective gasp, like, oh, that's good. Oh, there it is. There it is. Now we're on it. Now we got it, you know? And then, and it's a true creative collaborative work that is super gratifying, really gratifying, and really fun. And it's really exciting. It never gets old when you find it, and there it is. That's a great moment. And we had that on this one. We had that on. We have it. Sometimes it's more because sometimes you have to work a little harder to get it. But when it happens, it's a beautiful thing.
Elcock. Not to be. I don't want to be perceived as being critical of Elcock because he was a real genius, and I had a lot of fun writing about him. And he did fabulous work. It's just that he was so popular in the 1920s, unbelievably popular, that I'm sure he just didn't have a lot of time. And looking at the Arthur Conan Doyle Encyclopedia page on Elcock, I see that this illustration that you used for the cover was part of a 2-page spread. And you have really, really improved it, because Elcock, one of the things I've seen in his other work, particularly when he was short on time, he wasn't the greatest in composition. And the original 2-page spread, it's not really his best execution. You've got...
we kind of felt it was weighted creatively on the right side. And the rest...
Well, that's very nicely put. Yes, weighted creatively on the right side, and by excising the left side, you've lost nothing.
That was how we saw it.
Yeah, good assessment. Good assessment.
All the good stuff is on this side, so let's cut that out.
But we can thank Elcock for some of the popular iconography, or some of the maybe signature images of Holmes that we know from this later era. Of course, from this very same story, there is that illustration of the one-legged newspaper man holding the headline, "Murderous Attack upon Sherlock Holmes." That's a major one. One of my, two of my favorites really come from the Three Garadebs. We have, of course, Holmes on the telephone, which I don't think we have any other shot of Holmes on the telephone. And then the other was him gunning down Killer Evans as he's coming out of his hidey place in the floor after he shot Watson, and smacking him down. And they're both iconic. I mean, those are we can all instantly recall those to mind.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a cap on the subject of illustration with the Illustrious Client, when it came to Collier's, at this point, they passed over Freddie Steele, sadly, but they hired a terrific illustrator. I don't know why, but they hired John R. Flanagan, who was an Australian illustrator. He was born in Sydney, and he did 8 illustrations for Conan Doyle stories in 1924, including the Garadebs in Collier's. But his work for the Illustrious Client, was really nice, but he only did 4 drawings, and you've clearly chosen the right one when choosing this half of Elcock's drawing for the cover.
Good thing you didn't choose the other half.
Yeah.
What's happening?
That's on the back cover.
I like
That's
that.
great.
That's good. Yeah.
So, Steve, are you involved in any other BSI manuscript series or other publications coming up?
No.
Anything
I am not. These books, even though they're kind of, there's clearly a style to these things. There's, there's the manuscript, there's the transcription, there's the all the essays that come with it, Randall Stock's invaluable analysis of the provenance of these things. All these things, they take a lot of time, and you've got to round up the contributors, and people have to write everybody has to write everything, and then it's a time-consuming thing, and I know, Bob Katz and Andy Sahlberg and people, they've done multiple ones, and hats off to them, because it's work. It is work. And I was really happy to do this one because of my personal connection to the story. But it's just that much work that I have too much other work to do. So I don't have any more. I'm not doing any more in the foreseeable future, I don't think so.
Fair enough.
But I was proud of being asked to do this one. I was grateful to Mike Whalen for asking me to do this one.
Yeah, I know Mike would have been proud of what you produced here, and it's a wonderful legacy. So I think, and frankly, I think it's one of the best of the manuscript series. It's a great story. You've chosen some wonderful essayists. Visually, it's just remarkable. And of course, the book itself, in its black cover with the gold leaf on not only on the spine, but of course you've got Clutches of a Fiend, that snippet from the actual manuscript laid out in gold. It really is. These things sometimes just pop out. So, wonderful, wonderful book you've got here.
Thank you so much. I was, as I was saying earlier, it never really gets old when you work on something like this, and then it's there. This is a thing that did not exist in the world until now. And that's always a proud moment. I'm proud of the people who contributed to it too, because it's not, it's not just me. I mean, I sort of rode herd on it and contributed my bit to it, but it's everybody. It's a collective effort of everybody who's in there, and of course the people who helped shepherd it into print. That's all. There's a lot of hands go into getting a book into print, especially in the BSI, and so I'm proud of everybody who contributed to it. They all did a great job, and the manuscripts or the essays would come in, and I would read them, and I was like, oh, that's so good. I'd go back and read mine and go, I got to raise the bar. But yeah, I'm proud of everybody. Everybody did such a good job.
Our conversation with Steve Doyle continues for members of the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere community on Substack and Patreon. To make sure you can listen to this, just sign up at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock or ihearofsherlock.substack.com.
The Clutches of a Fiend and the entire manuscript series are so valuable. And I think we got to some of the reasons why it's valuable in the conversation with Steve. But this way, the vast majority of us will never own, which is just as well, a Sherlockian manuscript. I mean, these things do need to be in the care of responsible collectors, shared with the world, not locked away. Script is the insights. It gives you into the creative process, into the characters of Holmes and Watson, into the development of a story, into areas that were pursued in the creation of the case and then discarded for some reason, into changes, into relationships between the actual writing of the case and the life of the author. I mean, these are many people like us find that really interesting. And here in The Clutches of a Fiend, and that's why the books are valuable. Not only do you get the reproduction of the manuscript so you can see what it looks like, but you also have an opportunity to read the thoughts of 6 or 8 people who are really informed, who look at the manuscript in different ways. And Clutches of a Fiend has essays by Alan Reddig, Leslie Klinger, Monica Schmidt, Pat Ward, Ira Matetsky, Mike McSwiggan, Randall Scott, Bill Mason, Stephen's introduction himself, Andy Fusco's general introduction to the series. You know, you have the opportunity not only to look at the manuscript, but to look at the manuscript through the eyes of these other folks. And if you're as interested as we are in this sort of literary pursuit, it's really fabulous.
It really is. It's hard to add much more to what you just said there, other than to once again admire this as, I think, one of the top entries in the BSI Manuscript Series. So clearly the BSI Press improves at what it does every year. The material certainly lends itself to that. And the creativity of and the insight of the people who lend their talents to these essays and analyses are certainly all additive. Okay, Bert, this is everyone's favorite time of the show. That's right. It's time for Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to do your best, or worst, as some of the cases may be, to give us the answer. Now, if you were around here the last time, you may recall we gave you this clue. We learn, amid romantic revelations, what Holmes would think of the United Nations. Okay, Bert, do your thing.
Well, let me consult my AI resources.
Oy vey.
Oy vey. It's a wonderful case. It's one of the earliest cases of Sherlock Holmes where he's bested by a woman, bested by a beautiful American contralto who has adopted a strange diet. It's the case Watson called a scandal in bulimia.
Wow. Even the crickets are affected by that one.
Daffy Duck and I have something in common. No. We do our best and just get crickets.
Hey, you do. Well, you know, Bert, I've often followed you on these canonical couplets, and I've wondered if I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is using you to your fullest potential. And today, I realize that we are.
That's usually the introduction to one of these. You're not a good fit here, Waldo, are you? You're not really happy in our little family, are you?
Oh, boy. Well, the good news is we have lots of people who came to your rescue with the correct answer, including Eric Deckers, after a little bit of a scare. He said, these questions are getting so hard that I was afraid I was going a bit potty. I considered sending 60 individual emails, each naming one of the stories, but you're in luck. I figured it out this time. I must be some kind of a whiz. It's the story of the time that Holmes and Watson solved a mystery for a manufacturer of flexible medical-grade tubes based in southeastern France. It's the story Watson called The Adventure of the Grenoble Catheter. Oh, that can't be right. Listen to me bladder on. It's more likely to be The Noble Bachelor. Well, that is quite correct, Eric. Thank goodness you rescued yourself at the last moment there. And we did have a number of other people who have also guessed The Noble Bachelor. So we are going to give the prize wheel a big spin. Waiting for it to come around and land on number 62. 62, and that looks like it is Dan Petty. Hey, Dan, that's great. We just saw you last month in Boston at the Speckled Band meeting. How nice is that? Well, Dan, we will have a prize on its way to you. I think it is, yes, an old series Baker Street Journal issue. So that will be a wonderful addition to your Sherlockian collection. And now, here is this episode's canonical couplet. Here we go. The death of an adventuresome young rake established Watson's paramount mistake. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. All right. A lovely piece of Sherlockian memorabilia for whoever happens to guess this episode's canonical couplet correctly. Get them in. And also, you know, I should have noted this before, but if you would like to get in touch with us, we make it possible in so many different ways. If you go to Linktree/ihearofsherlock, that's linktr.ee/ihearofsherlock. It has all of our social connections there, all of the places where we keep a presence on the web. Of course, just like you do with the canonical couplet, you can email us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. And here's a bonus. We give you our phone number and suggest that you call in. Well, nobody talks on the phone anymore. I think audio is overrated. So you can text us at that very same number. That number is 5-1895-221-B-5 or 518-952-2125. Text whatever you like to that number, and we will say hi. But please keep the canonical couplets to email. It's easier for us to track that way. And now we're pleased to bring you this preview of a new segment on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. It's A Chance of Listening with your correspondent, Madeline Quinones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madeline Quinones. In the last episode, Scott and Bert did a great job of setting up this segment, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about what I'm going to be doing here. As Bert said, I gave a talk in Dayton at the Holmes, Doyle and Friends conference about Sherlockian podcasts, and then immediately afterwards discovered that there were several podcasts that I hadn't covered that I just had no idea about. And I really honestly thought at nearly 20 podcasts, I already knew all the podcasts out there, all the Sherlockian ones, and it turns out that I was wrong. Afterwards, I found even more podcasts that hadn't even been recommended to me and that I had never seen before. So this segment is going to be a significantly expanded version of that talk in Dayton. Every segment, I am going to talk about a different podcast. I will have a few minutes to go into each one, the history and progression of each podcast, you know, what they do, how they've changed over the years, and then give you some highlights, some episodes that stand out to me as being some of the best of each podcast, because sometimes it's not a good idea to start with the first episode if you're trying to get into a podcast, because oftentimes podcasters just aren't sure at the start, like how this show is going to go, even if they've done podcasting before. Now, here's the interesting thing. Currently, there are about 30 Sherlockian podcasts. I say about 30. I've managed to tally up that many, but there might be even more out there that I haven't found because they really are that obscure. And since January of 2019, there have been 17 new Sherlockian podcasts created. So even though there were no new podcasts in 2022, and there have been no new podcasts yet this year that I've been able to discern, that is a rate of nearly 3 new podcasts per year. So with my planning to do at least 24 segments about Sherlockian podcasts, there might very well be at least one more new podcast before I'm done. In fact, I am actually expecting there to be. It's most likely to be either another dramatization of the canon or else a story-by-story discussion of the canon. Those seem to be the two most popular podcast types, at least in recent history. It's going to be interesting. By the end of this, we'll see whether or not I'm right. And that's all I've got for now. I hope you guys enjoy, and I'm looking forward to doing a little deep dive each coming episode with you. Thanks for listening, and now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Yes.
Okay.
Can't
well,
agree more. Can't agree more with that.
No, can't argue with that. I think we've pretty much done all the damage we can here today. Oh, I should mention this. I should have mentioned this before. We have bonus material available.
Hooray!
The conversation with Steve Doyle was so interesting. We have some outtakes, or not outtakes, but just additional parts of our conversation. And we talk about Wessex Press. We talked about a new imprint that Steve and Mark Gagan are working on, the Sherlock Holmes Review, the Granada series, lots of additional conversation there, and about, I guess about 10 or 12 minutes worth of material. So if you are a paid member of Substack or of Patreon, that content will be available to you. So just check it out in the show notes. Is that all you've got to say for yourself?
Superb. Well, you're being so informative and helpful that
it's nice for a change.
I don't like to, get in the way of that.
It's like in Animal House when Bluto is saying, was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Pearl Harbor, what's he talking about? Don't stop him. He's on a roll.
Or a croissant. Maybe you're on a croissant.
It's light and airy. I like it. Well, we will be back here on the 15th of the month. Make sure you stay tuned for that. Tell all your friends about I Hear of Sherlock everywhere, and pick up a copy of Clutches of a Fiend. In the meantime, I will release you from my clutches here.
Good. Well, tell all your friends about I Hear of Sherlock everywhere, and when they stop laughing, tell them that you're really serious.
And then leave them...
No, seriously, there really is.
Yeah. Can you believe it? Who would believe? Yes.
No.
And
who would believe that I'm Burt Wolder?
And no one in their right mind would believe I'm Scott Monty. And they'd never believe.
Together we say...
The games
foot.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.